Thing we learned in lesson 1 and lesson 2, and today we're actually going to be multiplying. So instead of estimating like we did on Monday, instead of drawing pictures and using 100 grids to draw some pictures like we did yesterday, today we're going to actually do the multiplying. Let's see. Our essential question is, how is multiplying and dividing decimals similar to multiplying and dividing with whole numbers? It's the same. Remember, we've talked about this. The only difference is that you have to know where to put that decimal point, and that's what we're going to talk about today. The multiplication is the same. Let's see. Let's try this one. A shelf is 2 6/10 meters long. Each box is 45 hundredths meters long. The shelf will only fit one layer of boxes. What's the greatest number of boxes that will fit on the shelf? So here's a shelf. The total length is 2 6/10 meters. And we're going to put boxes that are 45 hundredths meters. Now, you might be thinking multiplication would be the way you'd want to solve this, right? Like a guess and check. You could do 45 hundredths and multiply it by some certain number to see what you get. But we don't really know how to multiply decimals yet. The other thing you could do is division. You could divide 45 hundredths into 2 6/10, and we definitely haven't done division with decimals. So the only thing I can think of that you might be able to use would be repeated addition. So that means 45 hundredths plus another 45 hundredths and see what you get. Then maybe add another one in. I don't think it's going to fit exactly. The reason why I don't think so is because the way the question's worded. What's the greatest number of boxes that will fit on the shelf? So the most that you can fit on the shelf without hanging over the edge. Okay, so try it. Repeated addition is going to be your method, I think, on this one. Okay, so try it for a minute, then we'll get back together and see what you would get. So 45 hundredths plus 45 hundredths. This would be how we would use repeated addition. Would give you 90 hundredths or 9/10. Still far away from the 2 6/10. If we do this again, that would be 90 hundredths, and we're going to add 45 hundredths to it. That gives us 1 35 hundredths. So far, we've added 3 times. We could, but we haven't actually learned where to put the decimal point when you add 2 decimals together. That's something that we haven't, I haven't showed you. No, it's not the same place. Not necessarily. Not every time. So if I'm going to add that up, then I get 8. 1 8/10, that's the 4th time. If we try to do that again, I have 1 8/10 plus, oops.
Did I say the answer?
No.
Yeah.
Plus 45 hundredths, that's a 0.
You have to borrow.
That gives us 2 25 hundredths, which would be enough. Right? Let's see, maybe we could do it one more time. That's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 times. So far I've done 45 hundredths times 5. If I have 2 25 hundredths plus 45 hundredths, let's see what I get now. That's 2 7/10. Too much, right? So the most I could fit on the shelf would be 5 boxes. Here is the other way. Here's what we're going to do today. So this is a preview of today's. Julissa, you can't sit there if you're going to talk to people. You asked me to move, and that's not a good spot if you're going to talk. So I'm going to show you how we multiply decimals. Put this in your notes, because this is going to be example number 1. Because something we could have done here was multiply, except we haven't learned how to do that yet. So put this into your notes as example number 1. If I do 45 hundredths, which is the size of each box, and I multiply that by 5, here's what this is going to look like. I'm making I'm not actually making a guess. I already did repeated addition, and I found the answer was 5. I'm going to show you, instead of using repeated addition, how you could have got the same answer. Okay? So if I multiply by 5, I have the 5 underneath and the 45 hundredths on the top, and then I start to multiply. 5 times 5 is 25. 5 times 4 is 20, plus 2 is 22. 5 times 0 is 0, plus 2 more is 2. Now, someone before said you just drop down the decimal, which would be all fine, except In this problem, it's fine because there's only one decimal in this number. This is the only number with a decimal point. The other one doesn't. At some point in this chapter, we're going to start multiplying two decimals together. So here is the trick. Nope. Here's what you need to do. You count backwards from the end of the number to see how many decimal places you need. In this case, there's 2. So you count 2 in from the end. In this case, all you needed to do was drop it down. Here's why here's why I'm showing you, because later in the lesson, later in the chapter, we might be multiplying something like this, where we have 2 decimals. See, now that has 2 decimals. So we would have to count from here, which is 2 places, and 1 place here. That makes 3 decimal places. So in our answer, it would be like that. 3 decimal places from the end. So the trick with multiplying decimals is that you count how many decimal places there are after each decimal point in the question, and then that's how many that you have in the total. Give it back. In today's lesson, there's only going to be 1 decimal and 1 whole number. That's what we're doing today. But later on, we're going to be doing more than, it's going to be 2 decimals that we're multiplying, which makes it a little trickier. So I'm telling you, that's why I want you to be counting how many decimal places there are, not just dropping it down. In this question right here, it would not be possible for me to just drop down a decimal point because there's 2 different decimal points. So where are you going to put it? So you have to count how many decimal places there are. So in this case, there's 1, 2, 3. So in your answer, you would have 3 after the decimal point. In this case, there's only 2. So in your answer, you would have only 2. Okay, so everybody needs a notebook in front of them because we're going to take some notes. I know you should have written that last question in your notes, but some people I see don't have a notebook open yet, and so I'm wondering where they might have written that down at, but make sure you have your notebook open. It's important because here's the thing. When we correct this assignment tomorrow, if you have the right numbers, but you have your decimal in the wrong place, your answer is wrong. Having a decimal in the wrong place makes a difference. Watch, because if I have something like this, 15729, and I put a decimal point here, and I put a $sign on that, that would be $1,572.90 because I would annex a 0 here and make that 90. If I have this number, same digits, right? But I put my decimal point right here, that makes $157.29, right? There's a difference between those 2 amounts, isn't there? So some people tomorrow are going to tell me, oh, instead of this, I put this. That's a difference. It's not the right, you might have the right digits, but you have to know where the decimal point goes because it makes a difference. Because then something that should have been in the ones place is now in the tens place because you scooted it over because of the decimal. So the decimal placement today is super important. If we take out, just like our essential question said, how is multiplying and dividing decimals similar to multiplying and dividing whole numbers? And I told you that they're the same. The steps in our multiplying today is going to be the same. The only difference is at the end of the problem, you decide where you're going to put that decimal point and then you place it. The multiplying part doesn't change. We're still going to take the bottom number in the furthest place that's farthest to the right, and we're going to multiply that with the top digit and then go over again, carry the numbers if we have to, just like we have since like 2nd grade when you did this. The only difference is now instead of whole numbers, we're going to have some decimal points. So in your notes, the first thing I want you to write is something that's going to sound weird because we said it the opposite way when we were multiplying or when we were adding and subtracting in chapter 5. Here, we do not line up the decimals. Right? I told you it was going to sound weird. Every time we wrote this in chapter 5, I always put line up the decimal points when you add and subtract. So we're going to write do not line up the decimals when you multiply, just to make it more specific. So because we learned it, the first time we learned decimals, we learned how to line them up. And you kind of got really, remember where we did decimal, decimal, line, decimal? Not here. We can't do that here. So on multiplying decimals, you don't line them up by the decimal point. You line them up just like if there were no decimal. So you kind of ignore the decimal point and you just line up the digits with each other. So here's an example. 5 times 3 and 12/100ths. Now, we talked yesterday about how multiplication is commutative. That means that you can mix up the numbers. It doesn't matter which order you multiply them in. So because this number has more digits, not necessarily a bigger number, it's not a bigger number, but it has more digits, I'm going to put that on the top. And I'm going to put the whole number on the bottom. So because multiplication is commutative, you can multiply them in whatever order that makes it most convenient for you. And in this case, it makes it more convenient for us to put the number with the most digits on the top. So we're going to put 3 and 12/100ths at the top and the 5 underneath. Now, I'm going to pretend like I don't have any decimals in this question until I'm all the way finished. Okay, so I'm going to pretend like I'm just multiplying 312 times 5, because basically that's what we're doing. Then at the very end of the problem, we'll place our decimal and then we'll be finished, okay? So just pretend like the decimal's not there. 5 times 2 is 10. 5 times 1 is 5, plus 1 more is 6. 5 times 3 is 15. And then we have to place our decimal. So it seems like it is that you're just going to drop it right down and put it in between the 5 and the 6. But remember what I showed you later in the chapter? We're going to be multiplying 2 decimals together. And so we want to get in a good habit of counting how many spaces are after the decimal. So in this number, we have 2 spaces after the decimal. So that means in our answer, we would also have 2 spaces after the decimal. So then my final answer would be 15. And you could put just 15 and 6/10, or you can put 15 and 60/100ths. But remember, this last 0 here, you don't necessarily need because it's on the end of the number. So if you were taking your math proficiency or even your math test for chapter 6 and you had a multiple choice question, you would see this as your final answer choice. It wouldn't have a 0 on the end. So make sure you know that those two things are the same. What if I put this? Could I put that as my answer?
No.
I still have a 156.
The decimal's in the wrong spot.
Decimal's in the wrong spot. So this is not the right answer. But I can guarantee you that on a math test, they're going to trick you by putting that as one of your choices. So probably all 4 of your choices will have 156. It'll just have a decimal in a different spot. And you'll have to decide which one of those is the right answer. Because they always like to try to make sure that you know exactly what you're doing here and give you some tricky answer choices. Nolan?
Sometimes they'll also do it like 0.156.
Yes, put a 0 at the front.
Or they'll go 156.0.
Yes. So they will
They'll
put,
some hard ones in there.
but usually they always give you those digits. And so
I try and think, I'm not sure if this is a good strategy. Can you tell me if it's good
Sure.
or not? Like, I'll do 5 times 12 is 60. Like, as long as the numbers are low enough.
well,
5 times 12 is
sure.
60.
If your math skills are strong enough, you can do that. I wouldn't say everybody should do it that way. And I understand what you're saying, but don't confuse everybody else by telling. But if that works for you, you can definitely do that. All right. We can put these in whatever order we want. So we're going to put the number with the most digits at the top. Just like that. Multiply that out and see what you get. So you multiply it. I'm going to do it up here, and then I want you to check your answer and see if you get the same thing as me. Don't look at the screen until you've finished it. Just solve this math question. Don't worry about that. Solve the math question. So we used 85/100ths on the top, 4 on the bottom, and so we did 4 times 5 is 20. We carried the 2. 4 times 8 is 32, plus 2 more is 34. We carried the 3, put the 4 underneath. 4 times 0 is 0, plus 3 more is 3. Then I counted these decimal places. 1, 2 here, and then there's none in this number, which makes 2 for my answer, which means that the decimal point should be between the 3 and the 4. So as your final answer, you could write 3 and 4/10 or 3 and 40/100ths. I want you to get used to not having that last zero on the end though. So on your homework for today, if you do either way, would be okay. Maybe when you're working with your partner or with your group members, if there's some that you accidentally have the zero on and you see somebody that's done that, make sure you tell them to take that off. Okay, let's try another one. Can you see how multiplying decimals and a whole number is similar to just multiplying? Pretty much the same thing.
The exact same thing.
Okay, so try this one. Okay, so remember multiplication is commutative. I switched them up to make sure the number with the most digits. Made sure the number with the most digits went on the top. So I have 6 and 58 times 2. 2 times 8 is 16. 2 times 5 is 10, plus 1 is 11. 2 times 6 is 12, plus 1 is 13. And then 2 decimal places in this number, none in this number, means I'd have a total of 2 for my answer. So my answer is 13 and 16 hundredths. Okay, look over at your assignment. Example number 1. Find the area of a rectangular board that is 4 feet by 3 and 62 hundredths feet. So,
What page is it?
remember that finding area is just length times width. So they're telling you that the length is 3 and 62 hundredths and the width is 4. So here's one way. They always give you one way and then another way. I wouldn't recommend repeated addition now that we know how to multiply, right? Repeated addition I recommended earlier for the problem of the day because I hadn't showed you how to do this yet. So, but I think that doing this, 3 and 62 hundredths, 3 and 62 hundredths, 3 and 62 hundredths, 3 and 62 hundredths, that's, it's time consuming, it takes more time. There's always more room for error the more steps you put into a problem. If we want to add these up just to be sure, I got 14 and 48 hundredths. Let's look at another way. Eyes on the screen. Eyes on the screen. So one way was repeated addition, just adding that number over and over and over again, the number of times it told you. The other way is multiplication, which is the way that I just showed you. So they got the same answer, 14 and 48 hundredths. There are two places to the right of the decimal point. So your answer would have 2 decimal places from the right in the product. Nod your head if you understand how to find where the decimal point goes. Okay, good. Because if you have that, then this lesson should be totally easy for you if you've got that. All right, look at example number 2. And they lined it up for us down here. Remember, you don't line up the decimal points. You line up as if there were no decimal points, like all the way over to the right-hand side. They did give us an estimate here. This is like what we did on Monday, remember? So they estimated the 96 hundredths up to 1. They rounded it and then did 1 times 3. So our answer should be something around 3. We wrote the number with the most digits on top. We did that. 3 times 6 is 18. 3 times 9 is 27. Plus 1 more is 28. 3 times 0 is 0. Plus 2 is 2. And then we have to count the decimal places. We have 2 in that number, none in this number, which means you have 2 in the product. So the answer would be 2 and 88 hundredths. And if I rounded that up to the nearest whole number, wouldn't I get 3? And that was my estimate. So that just helps to show you that your answer is a reasonable answer. It's pretty quick to round up 96 hundredths up to 1 whole and then do that multiplication real quick, just to get a good estimate to double check your answers. Okay, so I want you to work on the 2 guided practice questions. Check them with your neighbor. Now the number one thing I want you to be checking, hold on, not yet. Number one thing I want you to check for with your neighbor is where you place that decimal point. So make sure that you and your neighbor place the decimal point in the right spot. Once you've checked, you can start the assignment And we'll be done a couple of minutes before 1:30. Okay, so I'm going to set the timer for 20 minutes. You'll have your time. And then if you finish early, silent reading, remember.